internal developer platforms and how to make the engineers your best friends. I'm Crystal Hirschhorn, and I'm a director of engineering at Sneak. And today I'm going to talk to you about building internal developer platforms. So you're a small group of engineers, you're enthusiastic and driven to make your young startup succeed. And by way of your tenacious efforts and a bit of luck, you have success, and then you have more success. And with each funding round, your company decides to rapidly hire more engineers. Soon, you start to see the emergence of specialized teams and multiple skill sets as well. These aren't the early days anymore, where everyone was expected to do any and all types of work. And suddenly, you have more than 100 engineers and a growing tech stack that is organic, and multiple product lines have been introduced, and the inevitable tech debt starts to creep in. The engineers love the company, but there's a growing sentiment that the hypergrowth comes with cost. Costs in complexity, coordination, coupling, a lack of best practices, ownership gaps, and a handful of hero engineers. The cognitive load is too high, and so what can we do? We realized that building an internal developer platform would help us continue that early success and continue to grow. So today we'll look at the types of work that platform engineering teams need to perform, the guiding principles around those, and also look at some anti-patterns to try and not fall into some traps. But before we dive into that, I wanted to share with you a quote that I really love from Sarah Drasner. And so she says, "Who better to write the tools for developers than fellow developers?" And the reason why I love this quote is because we as engineers understand and can empathize directly with the works that our engineers need to get done and know how that work actually does get done. So we will build, hopefully, the right kind of developer platforms that enables them to get their work done. And so what are the types of works that platforms engineering teams need to do? And I think to do this effectively and to build an effective organization, you need to think about the types of work that these platform teams do, because it's going to underpin the flows of work that are required from the streamlined product teams that are actually delivering value to end customers. And so from experience, that's kind of how it shapes up. From having built out a couple of platform engineering organizations, you kind of have the split of work around consultancy, advocacy and training, documentation, planning and architecting, building and integrating, and then 20% about for operations. And when I put here building and integrating, I wanted to point out a key point. I put integrating here specifically because I think often what we're looking to do is to leverage commodity software and look at what we can get off the shelf rather than building everything from scratch ourselves, or at least we should be. And then there's the operational stuff as well. We do have things that are already up and running in production. We have to maintain them, but that also will include things like on-call responsibilities too. So also another key aspect is socio-technical systems. We're building organizations and we're building systems that are both for technical and humans as well. And this is why organizational design really matters and why it needs to be considered really heavily. And so to briefly touch and signpost you to an amazing resource, let's look at the team topologies for team types just briefly. So when you start to build out a platform engineering teams, you normally do start with a platform team, a core platform team, but quite quickly you'll start to create other teams around that, and you'll start to build things like enabling teams, complicated subsystem teams. So we think about things like DBAs. These things might start to emerge, and they're really trying to help support that top team type, that streamlined product team that delivers value to the end customers. Won't have much time to touch on it today, but I do kind of encourage you to go and read this book. It's a great resource when you're thinking about how to design organizations. And so let's jump into some platform guiding principles. But before we do that, I want to touch on another key quote that I really love from Charity Majors, who's a CTO at Honeycomb, and it's a perfect distillation of what we're trying to achieve with developer platforms. And she says, "Operations is the constellation of your organizational memory, which is patterns, practices, habits, defaults, aspirations, expertise, tools, and everything else used to deliver business value to your users." And the reason why I love this quote is that when we are building platforms for developers, we're thinking about how do we take all of these things listed here and actually codify these into the platforms as patterns and best practices that will support the engineers and that they can leverage really, really easily and really quickly. So some other kind of guiding principles I'd like to point out. Paving roads is the most important thing. So thinking about user flows to your systems, the products that you're delivering, and to remember to center your developer persona into the core of all the work that you do with building these platforms. We're trying to reduce the cognitive load on engineers. This is a reason why we invest in internal developer platforms in the first place, is to kind of help them get their jobs done as quickly as they can without having to jump through hurdles. Sane defaults is a really important thing. So think about your kind of growing engineering kind of landscape and the people that you have in your company. You might have a front-end engineer who doesn't really know a lot about infrastructure or operations, doesn't really need to or want to, and just wants to get their application up and running in production and then know the health of that application once it is running there. So how can you provide them the same defaults out of the box from that platform? If they need to get another type of resource, how can they plug that in, like a database, a resource or something, and then they can actually get their application running really quickly. Make it opinionated. I think this was something that Heroku did really well and kind of set the scene, and something that we try to still, emulate to this day, is try and follow that kind of Heroku model of helping enable engineers. Another key thing is dog fooding to create the empathy. So we're in our best place if we dog food what we create, so that we know exactly what it's like, the experience of using the tools that we are building for other engineers. And therefore we can kind of create this virtuous circle of actually improving the platforms that we're creating for others. Self-service is a big one. Engineers normally know what they need to do. They love self-service capabilities. And it also removes any kind of bottlenecking through the engineering organization, so that it's not all coming into one team to kind of have to provide the service. APIs and levels of abstraction is one of the most key ones, and is why I add it last. Think about the API surface that you're providing. How easy is that to reckon with? But also levels of abstraction in terms of, like, let engineers dive in where they're comfortable. Some of them will prefer to do things in a UI, and others would be quite happy, for instance, creating things like Terraform modules by following a playbook. So let them get their hands dirty where they want. And one key thing that we're using at Sneak today is Spotify's Backstage project. And I would really recommend this. And it's created a way to centralize our developer portal to provide all the things that I've just talked about on top of the platform that we built. And so let's touch on the last section on some anti-patterns. So these are a few that I've been thinking about recently. So here's a situation where you're building a platform. You don't want to create competing practices and standards, but it's really easy to fall into this kind of trap where you think you're going to replace the standard with a better standard and actually end up with an extra standard or an extra platform that people don't want to adopt. And this is a really famous XKCD comic here that I throw in to kind of represent that. Make sure that your API surface is as tight as possible and is easy to reckon with and reason with as possible. It's very easy to kind of say, okay, we can expose something for the CI pipelines, for the application itself, some configuration, instrumenting, observability are all done separately, but it's better to bring that under kind of one API and do those same defaults out of the box so that engineers don't need to think about it. Not invented here is a really key thing as well. It's kind of just buy commodity stuff off the shelf where you can. Free your team up to do things that are more kind of innovative and pertinent to the work of the company, and leverage that commodity software where you can. And last but not least, remember to tend to your garden. You need to keep documents up to date, training, upgrades and patches. And there are a plethora of other things I can mention here, but tend to your garden, because these things will quickly kind of consume you otherwise. And that's really it. So thank you for listening, and I hope this helps you in your future. Thanks.